Hey guys, this is Illusion Podfics, and today we're going to be reading Spider-Man Reborn by Kariran. This is Chapter 18. Being allowed into the Batcave on purpose felt different to the previous instances for Peter. The cave didn't carry the same eerie emptiness when he could hear each bat above his head, and while his dad and brothers accompanied him, Dr. Tompkins had just relieved him from his bed rest, and Peter was ready to move. He was ready to fly. Before, Peter had hidden his powers from his aunt and uncle. Before, he lost his Uncle Ben from Aldo's secrets. This time his family already were vigilantes, and this time they could help. He didn't have to do it alone now. They were already heroes. They understood in ways people from before didn't. He shared his sensory issues with his parents and Dr. Tompkins during the first checkup, since he woke up. Alfred had gotten him noise-canceling headphones that his dad called in Mr. Fox to fix when they weren't enough. They were great when everything started to be too loud. Peter had worn them often at first, before he started to leave them behind, if only to accustom himself to all the noise around him. And now he gets to practice in a controlled environment. It feels strangely like when Mr. Stark wanted to test his limits with the gym and monitors as Peter stood still for Tim. His brother placed little pads that connected to his tablet, which would monitor Peter's heart rate and blood pressure as he worked. "Stay still, Pete," Tim mumbled when Peter bounced on his feet again. Couldn't wait to swing around the city again. He'll be able to find Red Hood better now. And he can protect his family. This was perfect. "We'll start with the weights," his dad started, motioning to the rack by the wall. Peter nodded, freed from his brother's fussing to look over the rack. He went to the very end, remembering how much he lifted previously. They shouldn't be too hard. Peter vaguely remembered how he broke his door handle when he first discovered his powers from before. He remembers the learning curve. Weights should be easy enough. Plucking the 125-pound dumbbell with one hand, he turned to look at his gathered family. His dad watched him quietly, deep-seated worry clear in his eyes. Tim typed away on his tablet while glancing over at him often. Dick bounced on his heels while biting his lip, while Damian continued to seem unimpressed. Peter switched for the 150-pound, noting how Damian's expression hardly changed. Maybe he's used to it. They have been vigilantes, met others, and definitely new metas and aliens. Still, Peter pouted. "How does your arm feel? Any strain?" "You can put it back, chum. Thank you." "Hey, do you think you can lift me? Can my baby brother lift me?" "Sk. You are aware he will be impossible now." Placing the dumbbell back, Peter grinned before leaping into his dad's arm. "Can I train now?" Peter was not allowed to train to fight, but his dad did let him continue to use the cave's gem. He was confident he could change his dad's mind, and if not, he'll do what he's done before and get out on his own, once he figures out how to get out of the house, or convince his dad for sleepovers at Nate's. Still, he had access to the Batcave gem. "Peter, please. I know you like heights, but think about my heart," Dick called from below, arms out as if to catch Peter if he fell. The cave was tall. The ceiling went up fairly high and gave Peter more room to crawl around on, much to the exasperation of his family. He had stolen Robin's cape and had taken a domino mask before he could be stopped, and now had the cape being the only visible marker of his whereabouts. He could almost pretend to be out crawling in some warehouse or criminals' hideouts. "I won't fall." Peter moved around his stalactite as the bats rushed away from him, humming Mission Impossible as he did. Hopefully, he could befriend them soon. They were fluffier than Peter imagined. One bat came close, hovering beside him for a second before flying away. Maybe he should bring some fruit next time. "What are you doing, Dick?" Tim entered the cave carrying his much-loved thermos. Peter grinned, crawling into the shadows as his brother tried to point him out. He pulled the cape up, holding it close with one hand. "Pete, we have sensors in the cave. You can't hide up there." "Dang it." Dropping down, Peter ready to land in the practiced roll Dick had taught him, only to land on his brother instead. Dick groaned from underneath, pushing Peter before rolling over. "Peter, what were you thinking? That's dangerous!" Dick scolded, pulling Peter towards him to check for injuries and removing the mask. Tim snorted before heading off for the labs. Labs with chemicals. "Damian is not going to be happy about the cape, Pete. Stay still." "Sorry!" Peter rushed out of Dick's grasp as he chased after Tim. "Tim!" The lab inside the Batcave was impressive. Peter never went inside before, or at least he wasn't awake the first time he was taken there. The space itself was as organized and clean as you would expect, especially since it was his dad's design. Tim had taken a seat by the computer. Vials in a petri dish within reach of him. Sneaking around to the safety cabinet, Peter peered inside. There were vials and tubes of various chemicals lining its shelf. It had to be fully stocked. Peter vaguely wondered what he could do with each of the pieces inside. He couldn't remember the names of all the ingredients he would need to make web fluid, but he knew 2 of them. The rest could be figured out in time. What's the worst that could happen? The containers of salicylic acid were the closest within reach in regards to Peter's current height. He grabbed it quickly before depositing it on the table behind him. Grabbing a nearby chair, Peter pushed it towards the cabinet as he climbed onto it. Hoping the right chemicals would just stand out as he stared at the cabinet, Peter tried to recall everything he could about making his web fluid. Peter! Tim whirled around in his chair watching him. Is this gonna go in my coffee? No. Alright, just don't spill anything. Tim sighed, refocusing on into his own work. Peter did not, in fact, remember how to make his web fluid. He did manage to make an explosion in the lab, which left him being locked out of the lab till Tim and his dad both gave him lab safety tests and pamphlets. Spider-Man didn't have to have web fluid, at least not yet. There were other things he could do in the meantime, not to mention Peter's desire to return to Crime Alley soon. Since Peter had been assigned out of school until he could get control of his strength and senses better, Peter hadn't been able to plan another visit to Nate's. Practicing his strength first would be best. He could lie about his hearing and just keep the headphones in his bag when he goes back. Before, Peter used eggs to help him manage his strength. Hold the egg, clutch the egg, reach for the towel to wipe the yolk off. It was an issue when Aunt May questioned the empty egg cartons, but Peter had managed to sidetrack her well enough. Since Alfred knows about his strength, he might not need to mislead anyone. Sneaking into the empty kitchen, Peter listened for Alfred's heartbeat. Hearing him across the manor, Peter looked for the eggs he knew they would have. He took out the entire carton, just in case as he reached for one. 2 fingers touched the egg, applying pressure as he lifted it carefully. Peter had it just above the carton before the crack slid from underneath. The yolk slipped past the cracks as Peter's fingers pierced the egg in surprise. Dang it! Reaching for the next egg, Peter tried again, and again, and again. Master Peter, Alfred entered the kitchen, eyeing the cracked eggs and yolk dripping from the carton. Peter jumped, clinging to the ceiling as Alfred watched the egg drop to the ground. Yolk and eggs scattered along the clean tiles. I do hope you saved some eggs for breakfast tomorrow. Well, it wasn't exactly what I planned to happen, he grinned at Alfred before dropping back to the floor. I'll clean it up. Peter rushed for the drawer that held the cleaning towels as Alfred walked further into the kitchen. He didn't crack the 5th egg until he dropped in his surprise. Maybe he was finally getting the hang of it. I appreciate that, Master Peter. Let me know if you require any help, Alfred hummed, collecting his tea kettle from the cabinet nearby. His strength was not the hardest part of his powers returning. Peter had problems with it, sure, but that barely frustrated him as much as the senses. He had to get new sheets and some newer clothes that didn't bother him as much. His dad bought new couches and chairs whenever Peter even shifted in his seat. He had to relearn focusing, which led to meditation with his mom. He had to deal with sensory overloads all over again. It took him nearly 2 weeks to even convince his parents that he could return to school, under the agreement that if he had a migraine or felt oversensitive or overstimulated, he would call in home. He'd even managed to spot the stalker from his first meeting with the Red Hood a few times, though he always disappears whenever Peter catches sight of him. Peter was glad for his powers. He could train and be a vigilante again. He had to be old enough now that he'll have powers at his side too. If only he could convince his dad. Why not? I'm super strong now. I can help, Peter groaned, trailing after his dad in the halls. You're still too young. You taught Dick when he was 8. I'm almost 8. His dad stopped, taking measured breaths before crouching beside him. It was different with him. Peter, I don't want you getting hurt. I never want any of you kids to hurt, but for them, it's different. You don't need to follow us into that sort of danger. How was it any different? Peter knew Dick practically forced his dad's hand in training him. Tim was the same in that aspect, and he was positive Jason wanted to be Robin just as badly when he first arrived. Why was it different for Peter? Peter has powers. He could be Spider-Man again and help save people. Peter could protect his family with them. He didn't have to go after the big stuff if that was the problem. He would stick to just trailing his family if they didn't want him on his own. I can help, Peter tried again. No, Peter. His dad shook his head before standing. If you want to join us that night, you'll wait until you're older. Peter watched his dad walk away as the new idea came to mind. Daredevil taught him, even though he had been a teenager. He didn't like it, but he helped. And Peter knows another brutal vigilante with questionable morals who may teach him, if only to make sure Peter doesn't hurt himself. Grinning, Peter rushed to his room with a new plan in mind. He just needs to talk to Nate when he gets back to school tomorrow. The past weeks were a whirl of training his strength and learning to control it. He would come back from school and spend a few hours with his siblings or dad in the cave before heading back to finish his homework. He spent it with Dick or his dad the most, while Damian started to ignore him. Or at least, he didn't join in on the lessons like he did at first. Now Peter had a new problem. His strength may have destroyed a few doorknobs and eggs, but they never caused any actual harm to himself or his family. No, his newest problem was his teeth. At first, his mom suggested that they were just his baby teeth ready to come out. Peter was excited to have more of his teeth sold to the tooth fairy, but the pain hadn't stopped. Peter had taken to chewing on his pillow or his spoon at breakfast to try and stop the pain. His siblings teased him for it, but once Peter bit Duke, they decided it was time to intervene. "Let's see what's going on, Pete." Dick started, his thumb gently prying Peter's mouth open. The others sat around the lounge room, aka the boring room. Tim held a tablet in his hand, ready to write notes as Steph and Cass watched from either side. Damian perched himself by Cass, watching silently. "Maybe we should just ask Bruce to take him to the dentist," Duke offered, raising his hand tiredly from where he sat on the floor. "Yeah, I don't think a dentist would be great for this," Dick chuckled as he moved back, wiping his fingers where a little blood poked out. "Well, congrats, Peter. You've got baby fangs poking out." "Fangs?" Peter poked at his teeth, feeling a sharp pinprick just under his canines. He had fangs now? Fangs. Like fangs? Huh. Tim blinked, adding notes into his tablet as Steph read over his shoulder. "Like a puppy," Cass smiled, moving from the couch as she reached a hand out for Peter. "Cute. He has fangs now. Or will, once the baby canines fall out." Cass led him towards the kitchen, where Alfred prepared them some ice cream. The cold helped numb the pain as Peter gnawed on his spoon, denting the utensil the longer they sat there. Peter considered the implications of fangs. Has he had them before? He couldn't remember exactly, but if he did, would he get any other physical changes? Would he grow extra eyes? "Master Peter, perhaps you would prefer to bite on something else," Alfred suggested, placing a plate with a sandwich on it before him. Peter traded the destroyed spoon for the sandwich, relishing the little crunch of the lettuce. Making a new suit without anyone noticing was harder this time around. Alfred handled the laundry and would notice if any of his clothes were altered without his or Bruce's say. He also couldn't add new articles without the same problem, Alfred noticing. A simple domino mask would be too obvious, and his siblings would recognize him immediately, even with that. Peter stayed at his dresser a few days later. After finally fully returning to school, he had managed to schedule another playdate where he and Nate would sneak out again. He was going to his playdate with Nate today, and he needed a mask. His dad barely let him go, and he had to call his mom in for backup. This had to go well, or he might not be allowed out of the house ever again. Maybe Cass had extras. Her mask covered her face completely, though she might try and follow him, and Peter didn't want her to get hurt if Red Hood decided she wasn't good. He doubted he could steal anything from her without her noticing either. Falling back onto his bed, Peter thought through the options. There weren't many. He could borrow Nate's clothes. He's only a little taller than Peter. Nate's dad had an old wrestling mask in their living room. "Master Peter, are you ready to go?" Alfred knocked on the door, peering into the room. He doesn't have much of a choice at this point. Hopefully Nate won't mind. Peter followed Alfred into the car. His siblings had been checking in on him ever since the Joker incident and his powers, and Peter felt guilty for the reprieve of visiting Nate to get away from it. He loves them all, but he needed to do this without them hovering over his shoulder. Peter spent the entire drive going over the plan. Without a mask, he would need a hoodie or a cap to hide his face. He could borrow glasses to try and look different, though his family would notice no matter what disguise he put on. Maybe Nate's mom could put some makeup on him. His mom can change her face with it, and he vaguely remembers Miss Natasha doing something similar. Peter waved bye to Alfred before rushing past Nate's dad. Both boys ran upstairs to plan their night and subsequent stories to keep their families in the dark. Nate didn't have a family of vigilantes, but Peter had to be careful because of it. "Will your dad let me borrow his mask?" Peter asked the moment the door was closed. "The bright blue one? You want to wear it?" Nate gagged at the idea. Peter pushed him while giggling, mindful of his strength. He had learned to control it enough to not hurt anyone first thing after discovering its powers. "I don't wanna, but I sorta have to." He couldn't say that Gotham's vigilantes would recognize him. Nate thinks Peter is visiting his estranged brother. Jason likes wrestling, and he probably will be worried since I haven't seen him in a while, you know? The Waynes were famous. Peter could see why Mr. Stark complained about his childhood. Everyone knows everything about them. He was sure that there is an article somewhere about Peter's first word, and he will ignore it forever. Peter never looks up his own name in fear of just what he'll see. With his powers now, he spots the paparazzi a lot quicker this time, and is more aware of their presence. He knows now when they're nearby, and Peter can't even hide when he's out in public. Since Jason went missing when he was 15, No one had written articles about him. There were a few rumors, but his dad told the press he died overseas. That didn't stop gossip columns. There were so many rumors that he's alive circulate. Nate wouldn't question Peter, and now if he did check online, the rumors would be enough. He hasn't even asked him anything about it, just accepting Peter's word. I'll ask. Nate slipped out of his room, leaving Peter alone. Peter dropped his backpack before tugging the necklace off, hiding it in the first pocket of his bag. He quickly changed issues, too. If he's caught tonight, this whole scheme will crumble. He says no. It's priceless. Nate rolls his eyes at his dad's word. Peter groaned as the plan fell apart. I have another idea. Peter snuck into Nate's parents' room. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were downstairs, so Peter had to be quick. He kept an ear out on the couple as they planned a date night for the next week a floor below him. Mrs. Williams kept her makeup on the counter in a little blue bag. Peter had to jump before grabbing it. He couldn't remember how makeup works, though. Hey, Nate, do you know how to use this? He handed the bag to his friend as they sat in their room. No, but I see my mom put it on. Want to try it? Peter nodded as Nate emptied the bag between them. Tubes and containers fell out, along with brushes and weird metal contraptions. Peter immediately threw those back in the bag. They were a little too scary for him to trust Nate or himself to use. 20 minutes later, both Peter and Nate had makeup disguises. My lips look weird. Peter eyed the red lips. They looked big and crooked. A smear ran up his left cheek. It reminded him eerily of the Joker, just mistier. Pressing his thumb against it, he smeared the color back down to his chin. Yeah, well, I look like I was punched in the face. Nate pouted, his eyes surrounded by black eyeshadow. They stared at each other before bursting out laughing. Peter was sure that, if anything, his siblings would be too distracted by his makeup to be mad. Neither washed their faces as they climbed out of Nate's windows and down the tree. No one will bother us if we look like this, Nate giggled. After a short good luck, both boys split up again, Peter rushing towards old Gotham, his promise to Red Hood still fresh in his mind. He won't enter it on purpose. Staying in the shadows wasn't hard at this time. The sun set too early still, giving Peter more time before his family would go on patrol. What are you doing? Peter squeaked, whirling around to find Robin standing in the alley hidden. What did you do to your face? Damian might be the only sibling that wouldn't laugh at Peter's makeup. Of course he was the one to find him. You followed me! Damian's the only one to know about Red Hood. He knows Peter's plan with Nate. He hadn't been ignoring Peter. He'd been watching him. Even after the Joker stuff, Damian had hidden away from him. He was waiting. He waited for Peter's next playdate to follow him. Obviously. The Red Hood hurt you once. I do not wish to be blamed again the next time he does so. You won't. He didn't mean to, Peter whined, stomping his foot in frustration. He couldn't find Red Hood if Robin follows him. I'll be fine. I'm strong now. Go home, Damian. His brother hissed at his civilian name. Peter only crossed his arms, annoyed. He needed to make sure the Red Hood was only trying to be good. Like how the Punisher only hurt bad guys, even if he used excessive force. Deadpool was the same. They weren't like Spider-Man or Daredevil, but they were still the good guys. And good guys stopped the bad ones. Red Hood might even teach him some things if his dad refuses. Code names, Robin scowled. I don't care. I want to talk to Red Hood, but you'll scare him off. Peter peered around the corner, looking out for any creeps lurking nearby. No one would try anything with Robin standing right there, but that also means he won't find Red Hood. Though the stalker might ignore him now. He only saw him a few times near school, but he always disappeared once Peter noticed him. He hoped the guy wasn't close. Getting into Crime Alley would be a lot harder with him around. Peter could try climbing across the roof if it wouldn't potentially draw his family's attention. If you are hurt again, Father will see reason to blame me. I do not wish to spend my day washing any more cars than I already have. Right. Damian took the blame for the bruise before Peter had a chance to explain. He had a point, but the healing factor returned with his powers. If he was hurt, it would disappear just as soon. He won't hurt me again. Peter knew it. He knew it as well as he knew what he had to do. The Red Hood was obviously mad at himself for hurting him. Peter was confident that the man would intentionally cause him harm. You are naive. He can and will hurt you as he sees fit. He doesn't understand. Peter knows that he won't be hurt, but Damian doesn't. Damian is a kid too. Maybe Red Hood won't go after him either. Fine, but no talking. You make people angry when you do. Peter stuck out his tongue at his brother before darting away. Maybe Damian and Red Hood can get along too. He just had to make sure Robin doesn't instigate a fight first. Peter was more aware now that he has a tail. His brother flew overhead silently as they came closer to Crime Alley. He could hear his heartbeat above him the further Peter walked towards his destination. Peter had to stop before crossing the street into the territory he promised to avoid. Intentionally, he couldn't enter if he wanted to keep his promise. Robin would interfere if he tried to get some thugs to chase him there. Red Hood has gone as far as Cathedral Square before, so he might wander into Old Gotham too. The location of Red Hood was too hard to pin down, and Peter couldn't even use his senses to track him. Peter couldn't rely on the off chance he might show up in the same spot. He wanted to talk to him again, and now introduce him to his brother, somehow, without revealing Robin's identity, or his powers. This was getting harder to sort out. He could explain that his friendship with Red Robin led to an introduction to Robin. It was a flimsy excuse, but Peter couldn't just tell him Robin is his brother. Peter couldn't see an explanation working to cover their identities and explain the scenario itself. Not to mention, he would have to avoid using his powers to find him. There was just no excuse for climbing the walls that could assuage any suspicion or questioning, especially without an actual mask. Damian should have left him alone. It wouldn't put everyone's identities at risk. The shadow of Robin flew overhead, passing Peter. Robin disappeared past the rooftops, heading back into Old Gotham. He could hear the sound of a scuffle a few blocks away from him, no doubt drawing Robin's attention from their mission. Peter considered waiting for him to return, but this clears away his problem of introducing them. Now to figure out how to get into Crime Alley without breaking his promise. Peter ran a few blocks to the right, hoping his brother couldn't track him down. He kept an ear out for Damian's heartbeat, just in case. The switch of listening to sounds became easier after a few days at school, with only a few migraines sending him home early. Now if he could just find some helpful thugs to chase after him. The streets were fairly empty. Peter crept along the walls and through alleys in search of someone who would try to mug a kid. Most people in the streets were rushing home from work. It wasn't late enough for most thugs to really do much, but the threat still hung over the civilians. Peter spotted a man peering out of the alley closer to the street he couldn't cross. This might work. Pulling the hood over his head some more, he started walking with the crowd. Peter looked around, rubbing his arms anxiously. A perfect target for someone who wanted easy money. "Where are your parents, kid?" The man's arm shot out, dragging Peter into the otherwise empty alley. Mentally applauding his performance, Peter looked over the chump, dirty brown hair and brown eyes, with a scar crowding across his cheek. A decent enough crook. The man snorted when he got a look at Peter's makeup. "What happened there, eh?" He forgot about that. "My sister, sir." Peter attempted to pull his arm from the man's grip, feeling the hand tighten its hold. Before the man could say anything, Peter twisted harshly around, ducking as the grip loosened in surprise and sprinting back into the thinning crowd. The man yelled, his footsteps following him. Peter rushed across the street before the light changed, tucking his head further into the hood as he raced through Crime Alley. He just had to lose the guy before he could look for Red Hood. He skirted around civilians before diving down another alley. His senses were going off the further he ran. He chanced to glance over his shoulder as he raced forward. The crook wasn't following him anymore. Good, but what was setting off his spidey senses? Just as Peter faced forward once again, he bounced off a wall before tumbling to the ground. "What you got there, Hood?" one man sneered, raising his gun at level to Peter's head. The alley wasn't empty. 4 men in the Red Hood took up the space. The wall he hit was Red Hood's back, more so his legs than back. The mask was turned slightly, looking down at him before he faced forward. "I told you, new orders of business." His modulated voice growled, his hands tightened around the handles of the gun. The 4 men wore black suits and black ties. They stood out against the regular Crime Alley citizens. Peter watched the standoff between both sides. Everyone had guns, and Peter was not prepared for this fight. His senses felt on edge, hair tingling slightly at the small crowd. It wasn't entirely dangerous somehow. Maybe Red Hood's presence helped his senses feel safer? At least by a little bit. "The boss disagrees." "You don't scare him, Hood," the first man scoffed. Peter dubbed him Rude Asshole 1. "Get out of here, kid," Red Hood ordered, shifting to block Peter from their view. Peter's makeup wouldn't fool his family or Red Hood, but these guys haven't seen his face clearly. He could help. He just had to be careful about it. "I can help," Peter tugged on his hood to try and hide his face more, as he shifted in the stance Damian had taught him. The assholes laughed as Red Hood looked back at Peter's stance. "Absolutely not. Fuck off, kid." His modulated voice picked up on his growl. Peter ignored him, focusing instead on the men. He could do this. Once he proves it to Red Hood, they can talk, and he might have a teacher. As long as his dad doesn't throw Hood into Arkham. Peter surged forward, keeping his head down as he knocked over Rude Asshole 1. Gunshots echoed overhead, but Peter focused on the guy beneath him as he gave a sharp right hook, with as little strength as he could to avoid killing him. Peter rolled just as the man went limp as blood spurted through from where he had just been. The thug, still unconscious, bled from the opening. A gloved hand caught Peter's hood, hauling him from the body. "Get out of here." "Jesus Christ, kid." I can help, Peter wiggled, holding back on the strength as he tried to break free. He stumbled when the guy shoved him back towards the mouth of the alley. Peter turned to glare at the Red Hood, only to see the man had already gone back into the fight. 2 of the men were already down, and the final 2 were nearly done anyway. Peter watched, pouting from the alley's interest, as the Hood knocked out the final man. He didn't kill those 2. Peter could hear their heartbeats slow to a sleeping rate. Red Hood stood over their bodies for a moment before his mask faced Peter. He could hear the silent intake of breath before the vigilante came towards him. Peter watched him as he was picked up. Red Hood raised the grappling gun upwards as he carried them away from the bodies. They landed on a roof not too far from the fight. The Red Hood placed him back to his feet before crouching in front of him. "What was that, kid? Didn't I tell you to go?" Red Hood patted him down before fingers ran through his hair. "I wanted to help," Peter huffed, pushing away from him. He hadn't been hurt. "You killed one of them." "I did." "He didn't deserve that." Peter crossed his arms, repeating the same words as last time. Maybe Red Hood was more like the Punisher than Winter Soldier. "I think they all did." "What I do ain't your business." Red Hood moved to sit on the ledge. He tensed as Peter joined him once again, before relaxing. "Didn't I tell you not to come back? What even are you doing here?" "I had to. Someone chased me, so I ran here." Peter turned to look up at the mask, grinning. "It wasn't my choice." Red Hood snorted, his hand ruffling Peter's hair casually. "You're crazy." Hood went silent for a moment, his heartbeat speeding up in the space of conversation. "I heard what happened. With the Joker. You okay, kid? Batman got there in time?" "Mm-hmm." Peter tilted his head, considering his heartbeat beside him. "I'm okay." They sat on the ledge for a while, watching as the streets emptied as people rushed home. Neither spoke as the chatter from the ground below slowly faded. Red Hood's heart relaxed, his fingers landing upon Peter's wrist subtly. Peter leaned into him again, resting against the Hood's arm. "Your dad know what you're up to, right?" Red Hood broke the silence, his mask facing Peter's. "And what's up with the face?" "No, he wouldn't let me go if he did." Peter pouted at the mention of his makeup. He thought he did a decent job for his first time. "I needed a disguise." Hood hummed. Peter kicked his legs against the brick wall, considering the past week. Could he ask the Red Hood to go easy on his dad? Would it put everyone in danger if he did? Would he agree to train him? Maybe Peter could help him do better. Everyone says you're bad. Hood just needs a friend, someone who believes in him. And maybe Peter could be that. I don't think so. The Red Hood hummed again, reminding Peter of his dad at that moment. The short responses that carried more weight than he wanted to let on. "You want to be a hero too, right?" "I'm no hero, kid." Hood scoffed, shaking his head. "I think you are." Even though the Punisher killed, he still protected people. He looked out for kids and kept people safe in the only way he believed worked. It still hurt Tim, but that was something else. It had to be. If the Red Hood could apologize, then he wouldn't be so bad. Maybe they could get along instead. Killing is bad, but you think it's good, right? It stops the bad people from doing worse, and scares others from trying it. Deadpool explained it as nipping the problem in the ass. If people doing truly terrible acts were dead, there was no chance of them being free to do so again. Spider-Man believed in second chances, even if it led to a third or fourth chance, because maybe they just needed the opportunity to change. Maybe they just needed help. Spider-Man would never kill. He couldn't. Spider-Man is hope. Hope for change and better things. That didn't mean Deadpool and the Punisher were wrong. It just meant they had different opinions. They all wanted to solve the same problem, and just like in math, there are other equations to reach the answer. Yeah, exactly. Red Hood's voice softened, his modulator crackled at the tone. "Could you teach me?" Peter asked. He couldn't think of any better ways to ask this. His siblings all tried to turn him down gently, and Damian was the only one to really offer much in training. With his dad's return, Damian hasn't been able to teach him anymore. "Hell no, kid." The Red Hood patted his hair as they continued to look over the city. "Don't get into this life. Be better than me. Something with your feet on the ground." Peter stared down at his wrist, flexing it over the gap at the alley. How can he be better? His entire family was filled with vigilantes. Well, his mom was more of a thief than a hero, but even she was better than the rogues and petty criminals out in Gotham. He pressed 2 fingers down, kicking his feet in thought. A thin line of web connecting to the building across from them as his hum was cut off to choke. The fuck? Red Hood's hand clapped his back as Peter coughed, staring at his wrist in awe. He didn't think he could. Was he he had spinnerets? Cool! Peter pushed off the building, mind racing with the idea swinging as he dropped. A shout from above was cut off as he sailed down. Peter laughed at the rush of air, the feeling free of wind against his face as he dropped to the ground. A snap caught his attention, the webbing not strung enough above him. A body collided with his as Red Hood caught him, around the middle, swinging back around to another rooftop where Peter burst out into laughter. He had webs. "I'm Spider-Man!" Peter laughed, elated at the discovery of the webs. He could do it. He could be a vigilante again. Peter hugged Red Hood as ideas flooded his mind. He could finally help. He can protect them all. Finally. "You left." Damian stood in Peter's room with his arms crossed. Peter groaned, burrowing deeper into his bed. It was too warm to get out of right now. He definitely didn't miss this issue from the spider bite. "Did you see him?" "Mm-hmm. Bedtime." "Shh." Peter pulled his blanket over his head, closing his eyes again. The silence was comforting as much as it was concerning. Damian was in his room to talk, and he let him go back to sleep. Peter rolled over as he pulled Zitka close. They can talk in the morning, after breakfast. "Peter!" His blanket was ripped from the bed, carrying Peter over the edge of his bed. He yelped when the cold air rushed around him. Zitka fell by Damian's feet along with his blanket. Betrayed by his spidey senses, he hadn't felt any warning as Peter shivered on the floor. "Damian!" Peter scrambled to his feet, glaring up at his brother. Throwing himself back onto his bed, Peter kept his back to Damian. He won't talk to him if he's going to be mean. Peter itched to look over his shoulder, but he pushed the feeling away. A few moments passed before his blanket fell over him, hiding the dresser from view. "Tell me what happened." Damian sat on the edge of the bed as Peter pulled the blanket from his head. "He saved me," Peter huffed, wrapping the blanket around him. "He told me to stay away when he took me back to Nate's house." Damian left Peter's room before anything more could be said. He watched his door swing shut behind his brother. Red had saved him twice. The discovery of his spinnerets was new, and Peter should have been more cautious, but swinging in the night felt so achingly familiar. Peter missed something he only faintly remembers, and nearly died from chasing it. Hood hadn't been as amused as Peter was. If anything, the vigilante's heart has skyrocketed after it all. Peter had promised not to hop off buildings in exchange for lessons. His first one was the upcoming Saturday. Alright guys, and that is the end of Chapter 18 of Spider-Man Reborn by Kuririn. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.